I'm a simple man, mid-60s, retired from the factory, waking up most mornings with the hum of the coffee maker and a sky-blue sky. My routine used to comfort me, a quiet porch, the hiss of the kettle, my wife's voice somewhere in the kitchen talking about some appointment next week. But this morning changed everything. I arrived home a bit earlier than usual, deciding to skip my poker afternoon, just because. I walked through the back door, and froze. The house was quiet. Too quiet. My footsteps echoed on the kitchen tile. I called her name, no answer. I climbed the stairs, each step measured, slow. At the top, I paused. From the bedroom, I heard a soft laugh. Familiar. My wife's laugh. But underneath it, a thrill. A foreign tenderness. I stood there, heart pounding, listening. The door was slightly ajar. I edged closer. Voices, hushed, not harsh, not angry, intimate. I pressed my ear, just long enough. Two voices, hers, and a younger man's, voice low, calm. She said something. You so different. My head spun. I backed away without a sound. Descended the stairs in silence. I sat in my study, surrounded by old woodworking tools, manuscripts of letters I'd never mailed, memories of years I thought were mine alone. My hands trembled. Not with anger, not yet. With disbelief. I replayed every detail, the extra hours at the gym she'd mentioned, the sudden girls' weekend, the tight hugs at breakfast, the perfume I didn't recognize. It clicked. This wasn't imagination. It wasn't grief, yet. It was betrayal. Deep and deliberate. I sank into the chair. The afternoon sun streamed through the blinds, cutting the room with lines of light. I took a breath, thought about who I was, a man of quiet strength, of steady resolve. I wasn't soft. I wasn't broken yet. I closed my eyes and counted to 10. Then 20. Then 100. And I knew, I will not lash out. I will not scream. I will not cry. I will observe. I will gather. I will plan. I reached for my phone, slowly. Dialed a number I hadn't used in years, an old friend in tax enforcement. He answers. I speak calmly, I need advice. A favor. He listens. I tell him I have concerns about someone's finances. He says, send what you have. I hang up. No panic. No betrayal in my voice. Just purpose. I open my safe. Dig out small bundle of video footage, days when the security camera in the hallway accidentally caught someone slipping in past curfew. Not illegal. Just suspicious. I grab a pen and a notebook. I begin to write everything I remember, a date, time, clothes, words. I match them with bank statements, one bank account in my name, one in hers. A few irregular transfers, a pair of unfamiliar exits at 2 a.m. I note everything. I feel the tension in my jaw ease. Planning works that way. I let the daylight dim, turned on a lamp. Shadows shifted. My hands still tremble, only slightly, now. I close the notebook. I whisper to no one, tomorrow, I'll start. That night, I barely slept. My mind raced through every scenario, confrontation. Collapse. Escape. I rejected them all. I pictured instead, me, calm, 4 steps ahead. Gathering proof. Setting the stage. Observing from the wings. The betrayal lodged in me like a cold stone, but somewhere deeper, a spark. Not hope, but determination. I lay there, eyes on the ceiling, every breath deliberate. When morning came, I stood in the bathroom, looked at my reflection. There was sadness, yes. But also, clarity. I dry-shaved, splashed cold water, breathed in. I knew this story wouldn't end with tears. It would end on my terms. And that's where we begin. Because this morning is where the plan starts. Not with revenge. With resolve. The next morning started like any other. Coffee brewing. The smell of toast in the kitchen. My wife moving around with that easy grace, like nothing happened. I watched her from the doorway. She smiled, asked about my poker night. I lied, said I left early. She nodded, not a flicker of guilt in her eyes. That told me everything. She was confident. Comfortable. Certain she had me fooled. I decided to let her keep thinking that. I left the house mid-morning with a fishing pole in the truck bed. Not for fishing. Just for the alibi. I drove into town, stopped by the small print shop near the gas station. They knew me there, printed flyers for my woodshop classes years back. I handed over a USB stick. On it were still frames from the hallway camera. The man's face wasn't clear, but his build, it was enough. I asked the owner to print them in high resolution. No context. Just the image. Back in the truck, I called my old friend again. The one in tax enforcement. I told him the man's name. How did I know it? I'd heard it once before, months ago, when my wife was on speakerphone with her trainer. She laughed and said, "See you Thursday, Kyle." That name stuck. I kept it quiet. My friend ran it through a database. Said he'd call me in a few days. For the next week, I played the part of the unsuspecting husband. I made dinner, cleaned the porch, even suggested we go out for a Sunday drive. She seemed relieved, maybe even smug. At night, when she said she was meeting friends for wine, I nodded and wished her a good time. Then I followed her. Not close enough to be obvious, just enough to see where she went. Thursday evening. She pulled into a parking lot behind an old strip mall. Only 2 lights flickered above the cracked pavement. She got out, checked her phone, and walked to the side entrance of a gym. A minute later, the man emerged. Taller than I expected. Younger. Athletic. He glanced around before opening the door for her. My jaw tightened, but I didn't move. I watched them disappear inside. I stayed in the truck for an hour, then drove off. The point wasn't to confront. It was to confirm. And now I had confirmation. 2 days later, my friend called. He had information. Kyle was self-employed. Personal training, some freelance work at local events. No formal accounting. Which meant plenty of room for financial mistakes. My friend hinted there might be unpaid taxes. Maybe even misreported income. That was all I needed to hear. I began laying traps. Small ones at first. I mailed an anonymous note to the gym owner about questionable activities after hours. I left one of the printed photos under the wiper blade of Kyle's car, no words, just the image. I knew paranoia would do its work. Meanwhile, at home, I started keeping records of every time my wife left. Dates, times, excuses. I built a file on my computer, password protected, with copies of bank transactions, gas station receipts, even screenshots of her public social media posts. A picture of a latte here, a sunset there. They didn't look like much. But to me, they were puzzle pieces. Late one night, I sat in my study, the glow of the desk lamp casting long shadows on the wall. I imagined the moment when all this would come together. When every lie would crumble in front of her. When Kyle would realize the quiet, older man he thought he'd fooled, was holding the match that would burn down his comfortable little life. But that moment wasn't here yet. I still needed patience. Sunday morning, she asked if I wanted to join her for a walk. I agreed. We strolled down the quiet streets of our neighborhood. She talked about neighbors, about repainting the kitchen, about things that suddenly felt like filler. I nodded, adding small comments. My mind was elsewhere, already mapping the next step. That evening, I emailed a friend who worked in HR at a large corporation downtown. I described a hypothetical situation involving a personal trainer offering services under the table. She replied quickly, saying that if she ever received an anonymous tip about such behavior involving one of their contracted instructors, it would have to be investigated. I filed that away. The week stretched on. Every smile from her felt like a dare. Every casual touch, a reminder of the lie she thought I didn't see. I kept my cool. I cooked her favorite meals. I fixed the loose railing on the porch. I was building comfort, for her. The higher her sense of safety, the harder the fall. On Thursday night, she announced she'd be at the studio late. I nodded. 10 minutes after she left, I followed, different route this time, headlights off on the last street. I watched her park in the same lot. Kyle was already there. They hugged quickly, then went inside. I pulled out my phone and snapped a photo. Not blurry this time. That image, that was the cornerstone. It wasn't just suspicion anymore. It was evidence. Driving home, I felt something I hadn't felt since the day I caught them, control. I wasn't reacting anymore. I was acting. And each move brought me closer to the endgame. When I walked back into the house, the kitchen clock ticked softly. I poured myself a glass of water, stood by the window, and looked out into the dark yard. I thought about what was coming. And I smiled. Just a little. Because now, the plan was in motion. And neither of them saw it coming. The next week began with rain. Steady. Relentless. The kind of weather that soaks through your jacket no matter how fast you walk. I stayed home that Monday. She left early, claiming a yoga class. I watched her pull out of the driveway, wipers beating a frantic rhythm. I waited until her car disappeared, then opened the drawer of my desk. Inside was the manila folder. My folder. Photos. Dates. Receipts. A map of their movements. I laid them out on the desk like puzzle pieces. Each one fitting perfectly with the next. This wasn't just suspicion anymore. This was architecture. I called my friend in tax enforcement again. His tone was different this time, more serious. "We've got something," he said. Apparently, Carl's records showed income far higher than what he reported. Enough to be flagged. He told me an audit could be arranged. Quietly. I thanked him. We both knew I wasn't calling out of civic duty. That same afternoon, I drove into town. Stopped by the coffee shop where Carl often met clients. I ordered a black coffee, took a seat by the window. 10 minutes later, he walked in. Alone. He didn't notice me. I watched him work his phone, his expression shifting, smiling, frowning, typing fast. He was living in a bubble. Comfortable. Unaware that bubble was thinning by the hour. When he left, I followed. Not close, just enough to see where he went. Straight to the gym. I snapped another photo. Time-stamped. Then I drove home, the image already saved in the folder. That evening, she came home smelling faintly of cologne. Not mine. She kissed my cheek, asked about dinner. I told her I'd made stew. We ate together. She laughed at something on her phone. I laughed too. Neither of us meant it. The next day, I mailed an anonymous envelope to the gym's corporate office. Inside, at the time-stamped photo, a typed note about after-hours activities and potential misconduct. No signature. No return address. I knew it would land on a desk that mattered. Thursday night, my HR contact texted me. She'd heard whispers, someone matching Kyle's description was under review for conduct violations. I didn't reply right away. Just set the phone down and let the rain outside carry the moment. At home, I started planting seeds of doubt in my wife's mind. Subtle things. I'd mentioned that a neighbor saw her car somewhere unusual. Or that I'd gotten a call asking if we were selling the house. She'd frown, brush it off, but I could see it, tiny cracks forming. One evening, she came into the living room, phone in hand. Weird, she said, I just got a message from the gym about some policy change. I asked her what it was about. She shrugged. Said it was nothing. Changed the subject. But her voice had a tremor. By Friday, the rain had stopped. The air smelled clean, sharp. I decided to take a walk into town. Along the way, I passed the gym. The blinds were half closed, but through the gap, I saw Kyle. Sitting alone. Head down. Staring at paperwork. His shoulders were tense. I walked on, my steps slow, deliberate. The trap was tightening. That night, after she went to bed, I stayed up in my study. I poured a glass of bourbon, set it on the desk, and opened the folder again. I added 2 new items, a screenshot of Kyle's name on a staff suspension notice, and a printed bank statement showing a sudden withdrawal from our joint account. She thought I wouldn't notice. She thought I was too wrapped up in my quiet routines to check the numbers. She was wrong. I closed the folder, leaned back, and let out a long breath. Everything was moving exactly as I'd planned. Slow. Controlled. Unstoppable. Tomorrow, the next stage would begin. Saturday morning arrived crisp and bright. The kind of morning where the air feels lighter, like something is about to happen. She was already up when I walked into the kitchen. Making pancakes. Humming a tune I didn't recognize. I greeted her like I always do. Calm. Warm. Controlled. She smiled, maybe thinking the world was still hers. After breakfast, she said she needed to run some errands. I nodded, told her to take her time. As soon as she was out the door, I opened the closet in the guest room. From the top shelf, I pulled down a small black case. Inside was the old voice recorder I used back when I was still working, meetings, notes, interviews. I checked the battery. Still good. I placed it in the pocket of my jacket and headed into town. The plan for today wasn't about gathering more evidence. It was about creating a stage. A setting. The kind of moment that would burn itself into memory. My first stop was the local diner. I knew the owner, a man who'd been in town as long as I had. I asked him if he still rented out the back room for events. He said yes. I booked it for the following Saturday. No details given. Just a cash deposit and a smile. From there, I visited the print shop again. This time, I handed over a different file. A collection of cropped images, her car in the lot. Kyle at the gym door. The time-stamped photo of them together. I asked for them to be printed as large as possible, crisp, high definition. While they worked, I stopped at the florist. Ordered a bouquet of lilies, her favorite. Scheduled for delivery on the morning of the event. No card. Just flowers. Back home, she returned in the afternoon with shopping bags. Clothes, shoes. She chatted about sales and discounts. I listened, nodding, letting her fill the air with words. Every now and then, I'd ask a small question. Nothing probing. Just enough to keep her comfortable. That night, I sat in my study, the recorder on the desk in front of me. I thought about timing. About the order of things. The sequence mattered. It always does. Sunday came. We went to church, like we always did. She wore a new dress. People complimented her. She glowed under the attention. I stood beside her, polite smile in place, hands folded. Every handshake, every nod from a neighbor, felt like another layer of trust she thought she still had. After service, I shook Carl's hand. Yes, he was there. She hadn't expected me to approach him. His grip was firm, but there was a flicker in his eyes. A pause. I held his gaze just a moment too long. Then I let go. Walked away. That evening, I placed a call to my HR contact. Told her the hypothetical situation we'd discussed was no longer hypothetical. She didn't ask for proof, I think she already had enough from her side. She simply said, understood. We'll proceed. Monday through Wednesday passed in quiet preparation. At home, I was the same man she'd always known. Steady. Predictable. But behind that calm, everything was in motion. The photos were ready. The room was booked. The guest list, carefully chosen. Close friends, a few neighbors, and, importantly, people she wouldn't expect to see together. On Thursday, I made one last stop by the tax office. My friend there slid a folder across the desk. Inside were copies of official notices, letters addressed to Carl about pending investigation and required documentation. Nothing I could use publicly, but knowing they existed was enough to give my words weight. Friday night, she asked if I wanted to go out for dinner. I agreed. We sat across from each other in a booth, candlelight flickering between us. She laughed at something on her phone. I smiled back. Neither of us spoke about what mattered. When we got home, she went to bed early. I stayed up. Poured myself a drink. Sat in the quiet. In the morning, the stage would be set. Saturday. The day of the event. The bouquet arrived at the house around 9. She was delighted, confused. I told her I'd explain later. She didn't press. By noon, I was at the diner. The back room was ready. A long table, chairs arranged neatly. On the wall, the prints. The photos. Framed in simple black borders. Impossible to ignore. I placed the recorder at the center of the table. Tested it. Clear. Steady. Reliable. At 2 o'clock, the first guests arrived. Friends. Neighbors. A couple of her co-workers. Smiles. Handshakes. Small talk. By 2:30, she walked in. And that's when everything began to change. She stepped into the back room of the diner, her smile wide, eyes scanning the table, the people. Friends. Neighbors. A few faces she hadn't seen in years. She opened her mouth to speak, but then, she saw the wall. The smile froze. Her gaze fixed on the first photo. Her car. Parked in the dim lot. Then the next. Kyle at the gym door. And finally, the two of them together. Her hand drifted to her side, fingers curling slightly. The room went quiet. I stood up slowly. Thank you all for coming, I began, my voice steady. Calm. I explained that I had invited them here for clarity. For truth. My eyes never left hers. I reached down and pressed the button on the recorder. Her voice filled the room. Laughing. Whispering. His voice answering. The sounds weren't explicit, but the tone left no room for doubt. Murmurs rippled through the guests. A neighbor looked away. One of her co-workers shifted uncomfortably in her chair. Across the table, a friend of mine shook his head slowly. She tried to speak. "This isn't what it looks like," I raised my hand slightly. She stopped. "It's exactly what it looks like," I said, still calm. "Months of it. While I made dinner. While I fixed the porch. While I thought we were still us." Her lips trembled. Kyle wasn't in the room, but I made sure his presence was felt. I lifted a small folder from the table and laid it down. For those who don't know him, this is Kyle. A personal trainer. A man who doesn't always report his income. I let that hang in the air. I could see the realization settling on her face. The photos. The voices. The paperwork. This wasn't just a personal betrayal, it was a collapse. "I'm not here for apologies," I continued. "I'm here for closure. And for everyone to understand why, starting tomorrow, she won't be living in our home anymore." Gasps. A few eyes widened. I explained, briefly, that our joint accounts had been closed. That the house title was in my name alone. That she would be given her personal belongings and nothing else. I made sure every word was measured. No yelling. No rush. Just fact after fact. Someone at the table cleared their throat. My wife, soon-to-be ex-wife, looked around the room, as if searching for an ally. But there was only silence. I stepped toward her, not close enough to touch. "You wanted someone younger. Someone different. That's fine. But actions have consequences. And now, you get to face them." Her cheeks flushed. She tried again to speak, but the words wouldn't form. I turned back to the table. "I appreciate all of you coming today. You were part of our lives. You deserve to know the truth." With that, I reached over and stopped the recorder. The sudden silence was heavy, almost physical. She turned and left the room. No goodbye. No explanation. Just the sound of her heels on the tile, fading down the hall. For a moment, no one moved. Then chairs scraped. People stood, murmuring, some patting my shoulder as they left. I stayed behind, collecting the prints from the wall, sliding them into a large envelope. When the room was empty, I sat down alone. The bouquet of lilies was still on the table. Untouched. I looked at them for a long moment. Then I picked them up, walked outside, and placed them in the dumpster behind the diner. The air felt lighter. Cleaner. Driving home, I realized something. I hadn't felt this calm in months. Maybe years. There was no rush of triumph. No gloating. Just the quiet satisfaction of finishing what I started. When I pulled into the driveway, her car was gone. The house was dark. I unlocked the door, stepped inside, and closed it behind me. For the first time in a long time, it felt like my home again. It's been 6 weeks since that afternoon in the diner. The lilies are long gone. Her clothes, her makeup, her books, all packed into 2 suitcases I left in her sister's garage. I haven't heard her voice since. Not once. No calls. No letters. And that's fine by me. Life has a different rhythm now. Mornings are quiet again. I brew my coffee, open the paper, and sit on the porch. The air feels different, lighter. No more pretending. No more smiling through the lie. But just because I don't hear from her, doesn't mean I don't hear about her. In a small town, news travels faster than wind. A neighbor mentioned she's staying in a cramped apartment on the far side of town. The rent is high. Too high for someone with no steady income. She tried to pick up part-time work, but word gets around. People don't forget. And Kyle? Well, Kyle's world didn't stay intact for long. My friend from tax enforcement sent me an update. The audit went through. Back taxes, penalties, interest. A mountain of paperwork and a hole in his bank account. My HR contact told me his contract with the gym wasn't renewed. Which is a polite way of saying, he's done there. I even saw him once, 2 weeks ago, outside the grocery store. He looked thinner. Eyes tired. He noticed me. Hesitated. Then turned and walked away without a word. I didn't follow. I didn't need to. Some battles end the moment the other side realizes they've lost. As for me, I've been busy. Cleared out the old study. Turned it into a workshop for my woodworking again. Built a new set of shelves. Even started crafting a small boat model for the grandson of an old friend. There's a peace in shaping something with your hands. A kind of quiet that doesn't leave space for bitterness. Some nights, I sit on the porch long after sunset. I think about the years we had. The good ones. The laughs, the trips, the holidays. They were real. But so was the end. And I've learned not to blur the two. A few days ago, I found an envelope in my mailbox. No return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Her handwriting. It said, I made a mistake. That was all. No apology. No plea. Just those 4 words. I folded it once. Placed it in the bottom drawer of my desk. And I haven't opened it since. Because here's the thing, when you've been lied to, when you've been betrayed, there's a moment where you decide who you are. You can chase closure. Or, you can give yourself closure. I chose the second. The people at the diner still talk about that day. Not loudly. Not every time they see me. But every now and then, someone will mention it. They'll say, you handled it better than I would have. I just nod. It's not about better. It's about final. And for me, it's final. Next week, I'm taking a trip up north. Just me, the truck, and a fishing rod. No schedule. No one to check in with. Just the open road, the sound of tires on asphalt, and the promise of still water at the end. Because life moves forward. And I've learned, that's the best kind of revenge,